One can equally say that Russians are, that all Russians are Ukrainians, and say, Kiev should be the capital of Russia. The Russians were in full physical control of the dam when this happened, before that happened. The idea that somehow the Ukrainians were able to smuggle inside the dam, probably tons of explosives, while the Russians controlled the dam outside. I just think this is a fairy tale.
Bonjour, Witold Rodkiewicz. Pouvez-vous vous présenter?
Okay, I've been trained as a historian of the Russian Empire. I have a PhD in Russian history. Basically, for the last 20 years, I've been working as an analyst, mainly on issues having to do with Russian foreign policy, here at the Center for Eastern Studies. I also teach at the Warsaw University at the Center for East European Studies. So I've been, I have both historical and political science background, and I've been studying Russia the most part of my professional life.
Vladimir Poutine a souvent déclaré que l'Ukraine était russe pour justifier son invasion de la Crimée, du Donbass, etc. En tant qu'historien spécialiste de la Russie, quelle est votre analyse?
Well, first of all, no historical arguments cannot be used to violate international law. I mean, whatever the history, Ukraine existed in its international recognized border. Russia itself recognized the borders of Ukraine, including Crimea. There was a border treaty, there was a treaty of friendship, and so on and so on. As far as historical arguments, well, first of all, he's not saying that Ukraine is Russia. He's saying Ukrainians and Russians are one people. That's slightly different. And that's, of course, an argument that has been made by the Russian, within the Russian national discourse since at least mid-19th century. So in that sense, Vladimir Putin is just borrowing a page from the Russian imperial history. But it's simply not true. Ukrainians and Russians are not one people, in spite of all the ties that are binding them. We can ask the same way, are the Dutch and the Germans one people? There's been ideologists and there are people who claim that before, but it's not true. I think the bottom line is we believe, I think, in the principle of self-determination. People think they are a different nation. They are a different nation. Are Austrians and Germans one people? If the Austrians say they're different, that's it. I mean, this is the principle in which we all agreed. The world community agreed after 1945 that this is going to be the basic principle that we all recognize. So, of course, the ties, historical ties, linguistic ties, family ties between Russians and Ukrainians are deep. That's not an issue. One can even say the other way around, that it's the Russian taking into account the influence that Ukrainian elites had late 17th and early 18th century on the formation of Russian nation, Russian language, Russian literature, Russian church. One can equally say that Russians are, that all Russians are Ukrainians, and say Kiev should be the capital of Russia. The bottom line is you cannot use historical arguments to violate international law and attack other countries and annex territories. I think have to stick to the basics and don't be somehow diverted by the use of all kinds of arguments, including historical, from the really crucial issue that Russia violated international law. It attacked with armed force a neighboring country. It formally annexed the territories that it had recognized to be the part of that country. It violated the UN Charter. This is the issue, not what kind of relationship there were between the Russians and Ukrainians in 18th, 17th, 15th, or even 11th century. France and Germany all came from the Carolingian Empire, were part of one polity at one time. Doesn't make them one nation today, and wouldn't justify a French incorporation of the Federal Republic on the basis of the fact that in the 11th century or 18th century they formed one. They all came from one political unit.
Le 24 février 2022, Vladimir Poutine déclarait l'invasion de l'Ukraine au nom de la lutte contre le nazisme. En France, beaucoup d'experts assuraient que Poutine n'attaquerait pas. Qu'en était-il en Pologne? Avez-vous également été surpris par cette opération spéciale?
Well, first of all, I would argue that we should not even use the terms that are artificial terms and sort of misleading terms that are being used by the Russian official propaganda rhetoric. He didn't, he's not trying to justify a special operation. He's trying to justify an aggressive war, an war of aggression, an armed attack on a neighboring country. The Nazification is simply a joke. If any country, if you compare Ukraine and Russia, the country that is closer to the sort of fascist Nazi dictatorship is Russia, not Ukraine. It's simply preposterous to claim that Ukraine needs to be denazified. It's a democratic system. There's been democratic elections in Ukraine consistent since the beginning of its existence as an independent state in 1991. It has a freedom of press. In comparison with Russia, the contrast is glaring. In Russia, you cannot say a word critical of the war and current policies of the government. In Ukraine, this is normal. This is standard. You can read criticism of the government's policy in widely published newspapers in Ukraine. So to claim that Ukraine is somehow a Nazi country, it's preposterous. Ukrainians elected to be a president one of their co-citizens who is of Jewish origin, who identifies himself as being Jewish. I mean, to claim that they are Nazis is completely preposterous. But this is the kind of argument that's developed because of its emotional appeal, and it's based on the assumption that most people and most of the world does not know enough and doesn't care enough to understand how preposterous this claim is.
Les États-Unis et de nombreux pays européens renforcent leur aide militaire avec la livraison de munitions, missiles à longue portée, de chars lourds, d'avions de combat et tout récemment d'armes à sous-munitions. D'après vous, faut-il continuer à armer l'Ukraine? Craignez-vous une escalade?
What do you mean by escalation? I mean, the military operations in Ukraine since February 24th, 2022 have been conducted at the highest level of intensity that we saw on the European continent since 1945. The Russians are using everything that they have in their inventory, including ballistic missiles and strategic bombers, long-range missiles. So providing the victim of aggression with similar systems is to be seen as some kind of risky and dangerous escalation. I think this is again, we are accepting kind of terms of debate which are completely artificial and have no basis if we have some relationship with the reality on the ground. I think that Western supplies are insufficient. We're very late, and we should do a much better job in this. I mean, if you compare, you have to remember that this is almost 2,000 kilometers front line. There are probably about 700,000 people fighting there, men and women on both sides. And if you look at the numbers, or countries which are, I'm not going to name, but which are significant military powers, and they deliver, a couple of dozens of systems, it's laughable. I mean, Poland, which is not a military power, has delivered about 300 tanks to Ukraine. Please remember, they started their inventories with probably 2,000 tanks most of them are probably now gone. The Russians have similar numbers. This is the numbers we should be operating if we want to persuade the Russian side that we're serious in supporting Ukraine and that we have a chance to thwart the Russian offensive and to persuade the Russian elites that they cannot possibly win this war. They still operate under the assumption that they can win this war because the West, in their book, is not really committed. It's going to get tired and it's going to give up. It's just a question of time, so they have to persevere. That's the working assumption in which the Russian elite works. We have to disabuse them of that because that's the most important thing that we have to do. And by being so hesitant about providing individual military systems to Ukraine, we are reinforcing that assessment on the Russian side. And in that sense, we prolong the war and we provide arguments and we provide facts that make the Russian elite continue the war.
Pensez-vous que l'Ukraine a les moyens de reconquérir son territoire annexé? Avez-vous des informations sur la situation militaire actuelle?
No, I'm not a military specialist. This is something that other people do. It's very difficult to know if you don't have access to classified information, which I don't have. Usually in war, both sides are trying to keep their cards close to their chest, and this is one of the most guarded secrets. It's very difficult to know what the situation in the front is. And I'm not an expert in strictly technical military affairs, but in my opinion, in my assessment, I think the Ukrainians don't have to recover, to reconquer, to liberate the occupied territories. Just look at the basic fact that they don't have air cover. I mean, how are you to organize offensive operations? You need to concentrate forces. If you concentrate forces, you provide very good targets for the side that has air superiority. I think that's one of the basic problems. So as long as the Russians have air superiority, I can't imagine how you can organize an offensive on that. I mean, this is out of the question, I think. What we've done so far, I think, in terms of supplying Ukraine with military equipment, I think it's been great, it's been good, wonderful, but we should realize that it's not enough. We should realize the scale of this war. We are not going to get away with just having military spending at the level of 0.5% of GDP or 1% of GDP or even 2% of GDP. This is for peacetime, but not for a kind of war that the Russian Federation is waging and is prepared to wage. Sorry, this is the basic fundamental factor. I think this is people in the countries that are a little more further removed from the border and from this war than the so-called border countries are really not realizing how serious this is and what type of commitment it requires and what kind of priorities that should be for us if we want to avoid an even larger conflagration and the consequences of Ukrainian defeat, which would be enormous. You have to remember that the Russians started this war with demands that they placed not to Ukraine, not so much to Ukraine, but to NATO. The ultimata that they placed, that they handed over to Brussels and Washington in December 21, January 22, were not only about Ukraine. It was about us. The Russians want to rearrange them. Basically, they want to have to have the right to have military superiority in Europe and want the entire Europe to live in the shadow of Russian military preponderance, which is unacceptable, because they are not going to have it just for prestige sake. They're going to have all kinds of economic, political advantages from that situation. So I think this is a conflagration that's unprecedented. 1945. I'm not saying it's like the Second World War, not yet, thankfully, but it's in that league, and regionally definitely in that league. It's like, to use a historical comparative, which is not perfect, but it's like you can compare it to Japanese war against China in 1931, the annexation of Manchuria. I think that's a good parallel. We have to think in those terms. It's like Spanish Civil War, 1936, 1939. And the consequences are going to be equally of this war. It's going to be equally heavy and equally substantial as these two conflicts that I mentioned.
Moscou et Kiev se rejettent la responsabilité du barrage de Kakhovka, des risques d'attentat de la centrale de Zaporizhia. Quelle est votre analyse?
Well, if you are defending your country, what are you going to ruin it? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. There's no possible military advantages from blowing up of Kakhovka Dam for Ukrainians, apart from the fact that they didn't have any possible physical capability to do it. We know. I mean, again, I'm not an expert, but expertise that I saw clearly point to the fact that the dam was blown from inside. It was not, because please remember, it was built during the Soviet times and it was meant to withstand nuclear attacks. So to argue that it was possible to damage it to such an extent, to destroy it by attacking it with missiles, artillery, is simply preposterous. I mean, this was done by an explosion that was explosive material that were inside, and the Russians were in full physical control of the dam when this happened. Before that happened, the idea that somehow the Ukrainians were able to smuggle inside the dam, probably tons of explosives, while the Russians controlled the dam outside. This is a fairy tale. Zaporizhia plant, again, the Russians have consistently refused to the proposals that were formulated by the IAEA, International Agency for Atomic Energy, about neutralization of this area. That is, both sides would withdraw, would pledge not to have military forces within certain area around the plant and in the plant, and this provide the best way to prevent against any accidents. The Russians were the ones who refused to do this. So again, this should tell you which side here is trying to take advantage of the control of the plant to use it as a kind of a nuclear blackmail, which again fits the wider picture in which the Russians have been using nuclear blackmail from the beginning of the war, consistently, using various elements and using various tools, from propaganda to demonstrations and so on and so on. So yeah, this is, so I'm not, to me the situation is very clear on the basis of what I can see and on the basis of analysis of facts and data that are accessible, public domain.
Vladimir Poutine brandit régulièrement la menace nucléaire. Faut-il prendre ce risque au sérieux?
Yes, we should take it seriously, but it doesn't mean that we should be paralyzed by it. And the first thing that we should do, we shouldn't allow the other side to make nuclear blackmail effective, because this would be the end of us, basically. We would be then at the mercy of great power ruled by a very nasty regime. We have to remember that Vladimir Putin and the Russian elite as a whole is not motivated by any religious, ideological beliefs. They are very, on a certain level, they are very pragmatic people, and they care greatly about their personal safety and safety of their families, and so on and so on. Sometimes they pretend, and Vladimir Putin has a long record of claiming that he's been a believer, an Orthodox Christian who converted. I don't believe it. It's all for show. That means that as long as we make sure that the Kremlin believes that any use of nuclear weapons against us is going to bring immediate retaliation, we are safe, because they are not suicidal. We have to remember, they are not like, let's say, some kind of Islamic fundamentalists or even North Korean Marxists. No, they are secular people. They have very material interests. They have, look how Vladimir Putin behaves when he meets heads of states. He makes sure that he is not going to be exposed to slightest risk of contracting COVID. Is a person like that going to risk being annihilated in a nuclear exchange? No. I think we can safely base our reactions on that assumption.
Faut-il craindre la présence des troupes Wagner en Bélarus aux frontières de la Pologne?
I mean, Wagner troops are just part of the Kremlin's war machine. The additional risk that they create is that they might be used in a way that the Kremlin might be ready to use them, because it might think that this would provide him with deniability. So saying, okay, we have nothing to do with this. These guys are rogue. These guys are not our control. So we shouldn't be responsible for that. So this is a kind of scenario for which Wagner units, there is a risk that could be used in such a scenario. But in other words, their appearance increases the possibility that there can be some kind of escalation on the Belarusian borders with EU NATO countries. As you know, there has been escalation of a sort in which civilian dressed security people on the other side, the Belarusian side, mixed with migrants brought to Belarus especially for this purpose, attack Polish border guards with stones and all kinds of projectiles. So one cannot exclude some kind of provocation by Wagner, including, one can imagine, and shots being fired across the border, waiting for, killing people on our side. As a is a scenario that would then justify escalation, saying, depicting this as an attack on Russia, an attack on Belarus. I mean, this is a normal standard procedure on the Russian side. I mean, please remember that its attack on Ukraine is depicted and described and justified as a defense of Russia. It is a defensive, war. So creating some kind of pretext and creating some kind of at least incidents that would justify that and provide some pictures that could be then misinterpreted and sort of turned around in their meaning and sense is a serious danger. I mean, yesterday you probably heard there was an incursion by Belarusian military helicopters to the Polish territory. So this is serious, and we should be sort of psychologically and also, I hope, militarily ready politically ready for such scenarios. So I think the Russian side is getting more and more, I wouldn't say desperate, but definitely their situation is not easy. With the Ukrainian offensive and with possibly various economic factors, and especially the Wagner incident. What was it? 23rd, right? It was 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. Also showed that there are cracks, potential cracks within the system. So all this, I think, creates pressure on the Russian leadership, on the Kremlin leadership, to seek some kind of quick solution and some kind of ways to tilt the balance to their side, which is a kind of dangerous situation in which they might think of other ways new ways to shift the balance to their side and kind of scare us and prevent us from continuing military deliveries to Ukraine, and that's the crucial thing. So we have to kind of bear this in mind. But we shouldn't be paralyzed by this, because we are paralyzed by this. If we accept the terms of this situation, then all kinds of very unpleasant consequences are going to follow that are going to be more serious in the medium and longer run, or even the short run. So we should keep a clear head, not react emotionally and overreact, but we should try by our behavior and by our rhetoric convey to the Kremlin and to the other side that we are not going to be terrorized, and we're not going to be scared, we're not going to be persuaded by the use of force to stop our assistance to the Ukrainian fight for its independence and territorial integrity. And in a way, this is also a fight to preserve the basic principles on which international order, international law has functioned since 1945. That's absolutely crucial. If we fail in this, this is going to open a Pandora box, possibly with other great powers doing similar things again, and it's going to have consequences for us. I mean, it's also clear, and one should understand that from the Russian point of view, from the Kremlin's point of view, they look at this war in the context of a larger competition, a larger struggle between China and the West, and they see their operation in Ukraine to a large extent as a kind of service to their Chinese allies, because for the Chinese, this is extremely beneficial situation in which the US is thrown away from the Pacific and the Europe is completely preoccupied. So this is, and the Russians have long ago, not so long ago, I mean, I'm talking about a decade, and the Russian leadership has decided that having the choice between Western-centric and Sino-centric world, Sino-centric world from the point of view of the Russian elite, from the point of view of the interest of the Russian elite, is a lesser evil. So they have, this is the kind of strategic landscape within which they operate.
D'après vous, la paix est-elle possible? À quelles conditions?
As long as this leadership is in power in Russia, I think they are obsessed with the necessity of destroying Ukrainian independence. They don't think they can survive as a regime as long as Ukraine is a functioning independent state. That means that the only way to peace is to make it possible for the Ukrainians to defeat the Russian army to such an extent that it would not be able to conduct any operations. It would cease to be a fighting force. The best parallel that I can think of, again, with all the qualifications as far as historical parallels, is the German situation in the fall of 1918, when the German command understood that the war is lost, although they were still in possession of French and Belgian territory, and they started withdrawing, and basically the morale of the army collapsed, and there was a revolution in Germany itself. This is a kind of scenario that's optimal from our point of view, and I think, but it's probably the only scenario that could lead to a consolidated peace. So not only the defeat of the Russian army, of Russian armed forces, but also the collapse of the system and the replacement of the system by and probably the elite by new elite, which would draw lessons from the failure of Vladimir Putin's new imperial project, the way that new German and Japanese elites of 1945 drew lessons and built their policies on the assumptions that the imperial policies of their predecessors were catastrophic for their country.
Je vous remercie, Witold Rodkiewicz, pour nous avoir accordé cette interview.
Thank you for interviewing me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be provided with the opportunity to present my thoughts to the French public.